Hello you lovely lot, my name is Max, welcome back to my YouTube channel and another Nottingham Forest match preview where today we are discussing Forest's away trip to Manchester to face current reigning and defending Premier League champions Manchester City at the Etihad Stadium. Now I just want to caveat that this match preview and the Bournemouth one coming next weekend are being pre-recorded because I'm going away on holiday, so if any transfers happen during the latter stages of the transfer windows, any sackings, anything like that, apologies, I won't be covering them in too much detail in these match previews. It's more going to be about the substance behind the side in these upcoming videos. With that out of the way, let's discuss the format. If you are new to the channel, we start with an initial discussion on the situation and context of our opposition for this match. Then we dive into some of the stats and key players for our opposition, and then start talking a bit about the tactics surrounding the team and what we can expect on the day, followed by my score predictions for the match at the end of the video. So if you enjoy this kind of stuff, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a single match preview. With that being said, let's start talking about Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. As we always do, we start by giving a bit of context to our opposition, Manchester City, and it's pretty easy to see what the context is for Man City at the beginning of this season. Back-to-back Premier League champions looking for the hat-trick for the first time under Pep Guardiola, what would be their fifth Premier League title under the Spaniard, and they are probably favourites for it this season. And they've started this season off pretty much where they left off last campaign. 3 wins and a draw, most recently beating Crystal Palace, coming from 2-0 behind to beat them 4-0 thanks to a second half Erling Haaland hat-trick. And I've got to say, they are looking just as good as they did last season, which is very worrying. And of course, they've added some firepower to their team too. Julian Alvarez arriving from South America, Erling Haaland arriving from Borussia Dortmund, despite the fact that they've actually sold some quite key first team personnel, the likes of Gabriel Jesus, Raheem Sterling, Alexander Zinchenko. Despite this, they still look like probably the best team in the Premier League and maybe even the best team in the world right now. Well, that being said though, let's dive into the stats in a little bit more detail and give some substance behind this side as to why they are the best team in the Premier League and maybe even the world right now. If you didn't know, and I'd be surprised if you didn't, Man City are pretty good going forward. They're a pretty decent attacking side. They've scored the most goals and generated the most XG in the Premier League last season, and this trend seems to have continued into this season as well, being top of the table for both goals scored and expected goals generated, suggesting that they are far and away the best attacking team in the Premier League at the moment. Despite how good they are going forward, they're actually a really solid defensive unit, and we'll talk a bit about that in the tactics section, but they were top of the table last season for goals conceded and expected goals conceded over the course of their campaign. Not as good this season, 5 goals conceded in their last 2 games against Newcastle and Palace respectively, but you would imagine as the season sort of goes on, they're probably going to get that defensive record back on track and at least be in the top 2 or 3 teams defensively come the end of this season. Despite this, their defence can be an Achilles heel for them, particularly when they are countered on by very vertical and direct systems. And this is really an issue with the likes of them and Liverpool teams who are so dominant in games that they suffocate their opponents to the stage where when opportunities do come to their opponents, they do tend to make the most out of it. If you look at average shot distance in the Premier League last season, Man City and Liverpool were very high up in the table in terms of closeness to goal, proximity to goal of shots. They concede very high quality opportunities when they're counted on, and the expectation is that their goalkeepers, Edison and Alisson respectively, are good enough in the one-on-one to deal with those kinds of situations. So instead of talking in depth about the weaknesses in this team, because there really isn't that many for this Man City team at the moment, we're going to start waxing lyrical about some of the best teams in the Man City team at the moment, specifically possibly the best player in the world right now, Kevin De Bruyne. When you look at Kevin De Bruyne's FB ref page, there is a lot of green. I'm going to flash it up on the screen for you now, just as a bit of a visual aid. But as you will see, there is a lot of green, and he is in the top 1% of a lot of attacking metrics amongst midfielders in Europe. He is in the top 1% of midfielders in Europe for XG, shots, key passes, expected assists, goals, assists, shot creating actions, basically anything involving goal scoring or chance creation. He is usually in the top 1% amongst midfielders in Europe. But it isn't just that final product that he really excels at. In possession, he offers so much to this team, the top 5% of midfielders in Europe for progressive actions, and gets into really advanced attacking positions thanks to the freedom he's offered in this side, being in the top 1% of midfielders for touches in the box and progressive passes received, again suggesting his ability to get into these advanced positions. There is a slight caveat with this, so it is amongst central midfielders, and it's really hard to call Kevin De Bruyne a traditional central midfielder. He basically plays as a free 8 or potentially even a number 10, and has even played as a false nine over the course of the last year in this Man City team. So that will obviously boost up his attacking stats, but it definitely makes for very exciting reading and is very supportive of the idea that he is one of, if not the best player in the world right now on form. The second player I wanted to talk very briefly on was their new signing, Erling Braut Haaland, who has arrived at City with a very high reputation to uphold, and I think he might just manage it. Briefly, he has scored 28 goals since the beginning of last season, including a hat-trick at the weekend against Crystal Palace, and when you look at his FBref chart, there is a lot of positive stats in there, particularly in the attacking side of his game, being in the top 5% of forwards for XG, expected goals and assists per 90 minutes, and shots. Now, he isn't much of a creative threat in this team. He's not going to drop into space like Jesus or Aguero tried to do during their Man City careers. What he is a point man, a finisher, and a man whose explosive pace and ability to stretch defences will naturally create space in the half space for his teammates like De Bruyne, Gundogan, and Bernardo Silva. So with that being said, let's talk very briefly on the tactics for Man City. I could talk for a very long time about the tactical side of Pep Guardiola's game. We're going to very briefly touch on this and explain the fundamentals behind this positional based system. Okay, so we're here on the tactics board to give a brief explanation as to how Man City's tactics work. And as you can see, we've got City in that light blue, the citizen blue, and us playing in the red, of course. And it is somewhat hard and somewhat easy to describe the way in which Manchester City play. In the easy sense, it looks like a 4-3-3 kind of formation with Rodri sitting in the pivot of the midfield, the fullbacks tucking inside to create central overloads, the attacking midfielders pushing up into 3-8 roles, so there is constantly a front five to this team occupying each vertical zone of the pitch from left half space to right half space. What is difficult to say is that the positions don't really matter for Man City. Often you'll see players coming out into wide areas, forwards coming into more central areas, fullbacks maybe even occupying this sort of half space 3-8 kind of role. We'll see it quite often with João Cancelo down the left hand side. The positions in this team don't really matter to a great degree or extent, not like a Liverpool where you're always going to get that width from your fullbacks, or Nottingham Forest, for example, where we're always going to sit in that back five and break forward on the counter-attack. The shape and the individual positions of the players for Man City doesn't matter to a great extent. Now, this positional system can actually be broken down even further into 17 or 18 boxes or zones within the pitch. As you can see, I've very crudely drawn them out on the pitch here for just a sort of visual aid. And Steve Cooper does try to implement this for Nottingham Forest, but Pep Guardiola is definitely the manager who has sort of implemented this system with the most success amongst European managers. It's not quite as simple as these boxes on the pitch though, and apologies, I'm going to give you a very rough explanation of what all this means, but essentially the idea is to have no more than 3 players in the horizontal space and no more than 2 players in the vertical space. This forces players into occupying different positions, changing up, rotating. There's constantly movement within this side, essentially meaning that there's always pockets of space to be found by attacking players and even defensive players in this system to maximise chance creation. It generally forces teams and players to be more adaptable as they rotate positions, as they find themselves potentially having to drop into spaces that for other teams they wouldn't necessarily have to occupy, and it does end up being quite a rotational system in which players are able to pick up different positions, find areas, but essentially keep the width in the team, maintain the width and maintain a threat through the central channel. Now, the issue with this kind of system is that it does take a bit of time to learn and adapt to. As you can probably imagine, me just sort of giving you a brief explanation, it's not the most clear and concise strategy in the world. So new players like Julian Alvarez and Erling Haaland might take some time to adapt to this system, and that could potentially be an advantage to a team like Nottingham Forest where they may have an off day and not quite get the system to click in their heads. It's a very brief way of saying that, but I do think there is potentially the opportunity to capitalise on this. However, of course, the risk is worth the reward. Man City are often very dominant in their matches, and this is a byproduct of it because there's always space available for teammates, because there's always going to be 3 players horizontally, 2 players vertically, and they're always going to be rotating positionally. So how can Nottingham Forest actually deal with this? Personally, I think we should take a page out of the book of Newcastle during their 3-3 draw with the Citizens a couple of weeks back, and the way they managed this game was pressing the half space using Joel Linton and Bruno Guimaraes in the midfield in almost a double pivot kind of sense, pressing the half space and constantly forcing the ball into rotations and not letting them get the ball forward too aggressively or looking to disrupt the patterns of play that Man City are putting together. Now, this is going to be very difficult. It requires 2 very energetic ball-winning central midfielders, but I do think we do have those kinds of players in our team. I think that Lewis O'Brien would do this pretty well. I think that Mangala, if he's fit for the match, could do this. It definitely is the kind of game where you want midfielders who are going to do a lot of running and do a lot of pressing in the central areas. And I do think we kind of have those kinds of players available to us already. The final thing regarding City I kind of want to touch on is that they can be victims of their own success. Pep Guardiola is very guilty of tinkering with his side when he feels like he's got the perfect team. He always looks to evolve it to take it to the next stage. Look at them in the Champions League final against Chelsea, where one or two too many tinkers basically cost them that match against them in the Champions League final. And Pep is very guilty of doing this, and this is potentially something we could see from him on the day, looking to change things up now. The midweek fixtures are here, getting new faces into the team, and that could potentially leave the opening for us to at least nick a goal, maybe even get a point to take home to the City ground. As negative as this may sound, I do think City are going to beat us. I don't think that's a particularly ludicrous statement to be making, probably 2-0 or something in that ballpark. I think you're pretty naive if you think we're going to go up to probably the best team in the world right now and come away with 3 points or maybe even a point. I do think this is going to be the kind of game where it's going to be damage limitation, looking to not take too much of a hit to our goal difference, maybe try and nick a late goal to keep things not too embarrassing, but generally just have a good opportunity to play against some of the best players in the world and learn from one of the best coaches in the world in terms of tactics and all that stuff. Of course, though, let me know what you think of this game and your scoreline predictions for the match in the comments section down below, and also what you thought of my tactical analysis of Manchester City. It was very crude, it was very sort of basic in terms of the description, but I'm sure you all understand that it's not quite as simple to describe how Man City play because they're so fluid in the way they can approach matches. Of course, though, if you do enjoy this kind of stuff, don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. I will catch you later.